IO. I'll just
Sean, if I'm not mistaken, that looks to me like a #1 album.
Well, this is the strange thing. It's not often we get to review the #1 album, is it, Sid? It's the one that's outselling Taylor Swift in Britain this week. It's astonishingly, it's by Peter Gabriel. I don't know if you know about Peter Gabriel, but he was a singer years ago, and he's just come back after 21 years with his first new album of songs since 2002, and it's become his first #1 album for 37 years. This is incredible. It's almost as incredible as how long the album's taken to make. Earlier this year, Peter Gabriel toured, and he played most of these songs every night. There's 12 songs on the album. I heard 11 of them the nights I saw him. So he was asking a lot of the audience, who'd all paid an awful lot of money to see him, to play these arena shows with very spectacular visuals, and a set half made up of songs they hadn't heard. On 6 nights, he sang a song that was 5 or 6, I think 5 nights, sorry. He sang a song that's so new, it's not even on this album. A song called What Lies Ahead, which he keeps saying is on the next album. I don't know when that will be. He says he's going to speed it up, and he says he's got loads of stuff in the can and just needs to finish it off. But he says that every time. So, and as I say, last time it was 21 years before we got the record. He said he was making an album called IO immediately on the release of Up in 2002. People are taking that to mean this is the album he started then. It isn't the album he started then. These are much more recently composed songs. I think anything he recorded for the proto-IO in 2002 has long been discarded. So he's just kept the title. That's the basic thing about that. It is, as you'd expect, a lavish affair. There's a lot of musicians on this. His usual band, Tony Levin from King Crimson on bass, David Rhodes is guitarist for 43 years or more now, Manu Katché, who first played on So in 1986, and loads of other people as well, a full orchestra, 2 choirs, a Soweto gospel choir and a more than 100-piece Swedish male voice choir. It's got Brian Eno sticking his nose in on loads of the tracks, including tracks he's not credited on, and it's got a host of other musicians familiar and unfamiliar to us from previous Peter Gabriel albums. What did you think of this?
I love Peter Gabriel. I saw him loads of times with Genesis. I've seen him a few times throughout his solo career. But I found that with the, what was it called? Was it called Up?
Previous studio album of songs, yeah.
Yeah, there was nothing wrong with it, but it didn't kind of haul me in. It didn't grab me by the lapels. It was just kind of, there's a nice Peter Gabriel album, and with this one, it was a bit like that when I first started listening to it. Although I did say to you a couple of weeks ago that I thought it might be a grower.
Yeah.
And I've found that, sure enough, I've been listening to it. I don't have a copy of it, so the only means of listening to it is via the streaming service that I subscribe to, Quobuzz, which does allow you to listen in high res. So I've only heard the bright side and the dark side mixes. And I remember a conversation we had where we were talking about years ago, there was a rumor that, the new album was about to come out. I mean, this is years ago. And I remember a conversation we had about it. And I was saying to you, what Peter Gabriel needs to do, because that's what every artist wants. They want fans to give them career advice. I said, yes. Peter Gabriel needs to do is he needs to record an album of songs that are stripped back, because he's got such a beautiful voice, Peter Gabriel. I mean, he's got, wow, it really gets deep into your heart. In a way, what I like about this album is I can hear a bit of that album in my head. I think, you'll forgive me, I've had to write down the names because I cannot remember the names of songs for anybody, not just Peter Gabriel. I thought by far and away for me, the best song was And Still. But also,
that's my favourite too.
playing for time and so much, I think it's called, fit the bill. And Love Can Heal is a lovely track as well, although it's largely a sonic return to Mercy Street. It struck me, but so that's on the good side. On the downside for me, there's a lot of Peter Gabriel songs which are just perfectly acceptable, but don't do much for me. So Panopticon, Olive Tree, God, what's the other one? The Court, I think. They all sounded like they were recorded like in the adjacent sessions around So or Up rather. They all kind of have that sort of vibe to them. There's nothing wrong with them, but it doesn't grab me in the same way. That said, I think there's a lot to like about this, and I've enjoyed. I started off being very irritated by dark mixes and light mixes and stuff like that. And I didn't listen to any of the downloads that he was making available in the run up to the album. But as I've listened to the album more and more, I have enjoyed comparing and contrasting between the two things. But what I've not heard is any of the surround mixes, which I know you have, and I imagine they sound astonishing.
Yeah, the dark side and the bright side are available in all versions of this, really. There's a 2 CD set. You can't get a single CD set. There are 2 double albums, the bright side and the dark side. But the version I've got is this 3-disc set, which is the bright side, the dark side, and the inside mixes. So you get a 3rd disc, which is a Blu-ray, and that's got all 3 mixes on it. And the one I've been playing by far the most is the surround mix. I'm interested in surround. I think you are as well.
Yeah.
It's a way of finding out new things about albums you think you're very familiar with. But I just find this mix particularly is by a guy called Hans Martin Buff, who I think is German. And he basically moved into Real World Studios to what's called the Red Room, but Gabriel now calls it the Buff Room, where he does his surround sound mixes. And on those mixes, in the booklet, which is it's got everything but the lyrics. The booklet is quite extensive. It's got an opening note by your man himself, and then it's got for every song. Here's a song, Panopticon. I know it's one of your favourites. You get the complete instrumental guide. You get a work of art and attributed at the bottom for that song. And what's obvious from here is it says musician credits are for all mixers except where indicated. So there are extra instruments added to some of the mixes by various people, and one of them is Hans Martin Buff, who, for example, on Panopticon, the ending of Panopticon is, I think, more effective in the inside mix. It's got an extra guitar part, and so that's got. And in Love Can Heal, there's an extra female voice, which apparently is a woman called Faye Doll, who is Peter Gabriel's tape archivist and an assistant engineer on this album. When he was asked, do you think there'd be any more albums in surround sound? Hans Martin Buff said, Faye Doll is completely on top of the archive. We've got everything. We've got every multi-track. So it's possible, but there's been no decision taken. The inside mix is, they often use the word immersive about surround mixes.
Yeah.
This is immersive. This is genuinely immersive. And you hear all kinds of things on this record. As far as the songs go, you've been very eloquent about the songs. I think there are the weakest track is a song called Olive Tree, which I think you mentioned. That was one of the weakest songs live as well.
Why is it weak?
I think it's basically musically anodyne. I think it's musically dated. I think the brass performances, while very well performed, are basically very similar to what you pointed out. You can call me Owl by Paul Simon from Graceland. I think it could be 1985-86 again. Yeah. It could be that song, and there's no sign of any time having passed since then in the arrangement and production of that song. Live, it was very interesting to hear these songs live. They work very well live, even though most of them are, again, you've pointed this out, quite somber and some very piano-based moments. And I thought that was very interesting to present these songs as new to an arena audience. It was brave. He is a brave performer, I think. And I also think he's a performer who doesn't care how many it sells. Yeah. I don't think he's ever cared about that. He goes into selling mode when an album comes out and gives loads of interviews because he thinks that's his job. But he thinks his real job is to do what he wants to do, and whenever he wants to. And nowadays, it's got him into a lot of trouble in the past with managers and record companies, particularly. I mean, the third album, which is a brilliant album and was a breakthrough in his sound, that led to him being dropped by Atlantic Records. Atlantic Records dropped him for making that album, and so he just didn't care. He just, and then when the Games Without Frontiers was a hit, Atlantic tried to buy the album back off him.
Really?
He told them to get stuffed. Yeah, he wouldn't release. He's never been released by them ever since. And
I wonder how Atlantic Records felt when So was released.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Although he was on Geffen then, and when he released the album after So, which was the soundtrack to Martin Scorsese's film The Last Temptation of Christ, an album called Passion, which is probably one of my favourite Peter Gabriel.
Mine too.
The American record company Geffen put a sticker on every copy in the record shop saying, "This is not the follow-up to So." Thanks. But anyway, live, I thought Olive Tree was weak anyway, and it seemed just happy clappy. And the only thing that's unusual about it is the bizarre words. I saw Bruce Springsteen before I saw Peter Gabriel the first time, the night before. And Bruce Springsteen, it's an amazing experience. It's just worth going if you can afford it. But he sings songs about everyday life with great wit and eloquence. So it's, falling in love, it's getting a job, losing a job, going through divorce, being bereaved. All the major things in life, and some short story Raymond Carver type quieter songs make up his lyrical world. So you have 60 or 70,000 people in a football stadium. Yes, I remember this when it happened to me, everybody jumping up and down, and it was a remarkable experience. The following night, I was in an arena in the same city, Birmingham, seeing Peter Gabriel sing a song about a man who's donned a brain helmet because it will allow him to read the thoughts of other people. And then Gabriel says, and then what he finds out is it doesn't take him where he thinks it's going to go. So this is a song about a man wearing a brain helmet and achieving telepathic communion with a tree. He's in, when he's got the sun shining down on my leaves and the water's running down my back, he's the tree at that point.
Right.
And he actually sings.
I didn't know that. I didn't know what the
here in this helmet. I can read other minds. And I think I sat there thinking, this is quite a lyrical contrast with right now. You're talking about a performer who's in a different lyrical world to Bruce Springsteen.
But for all I'm not that fussed on the track, I am glad there's room in the musical universe for a man who wants to write about a song about having telepathic communion with a tree.
And take it to #1 in the album charts.
Yeah.
And there's another song on this album, which is called Road to Joy, which is co-produced by Brian Eno, that track.
Yeah.
And that's got this picture by Ai Weiwei, the Chinese artist.
Yeah.
And that's the most upbeat song on the album, probably. It's the most relentlessly, it's called Road to Joy. And somewhat typically, that's about a man suffering from locked-in syndrome. And he's just hoping people can hear him, and he wants to get up and get on the road to joy. Both Road to Joy and Olive Tree are from another project called the Brain Project, and that will include new songs like those two and other new songs and some more familiar songs. I think Here Comes the Flood is in it. But in the interview in the Times this week, the interviewer spoke to people at Real World about, as he was walking out, about the Brain Project, and they say, it's not been decided what exact form that project will take yet.
Right.
So there's the Brain Project, and there's another new album that he says are on the way. Whether any of these actually appear is yet to be seen. But the best song on the album is another song mentioned by you. I love Playing for Time. It's really grown on me, and it's never lost its grip on me. Playing for Time it's a return to a style he's not done. It's a big ballad. It's a bit like Randy Newman at times.
Yeah, very,
very dramatic. And he's a huge fan of Randy Newman.
Yeah.
The first album, Waiting for the Big One, is very influenced by Randy Newman, and Randy Newman is one of his favourite songwriters.
Yeah, and I think that.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think that I clocked the Randy Newman quality to that straight away. Yeah, yeah.
And they are friends now. He did the Babe song that was written by Randy Newman. Randy Newman's covered big time for the And I'll Scratch Yours project of other artists doing Peter Gabriel songs he set up. And I think that's a remarkably moving song. And again, basically him on the piano with the orchestra coming in a kind of dynamic way, and it builds and builds. So much. You also mentioned So Much. That's a very short song, and it's very simple. And I think that's one of the best songs he's ever written. I think it's only a man of his age could write that song, because there's so much to be done, which is quite funny because he's not going to do it very quickly, is he? He's going to run out of time. But the best of all of them is And Still. And in the live concert, And Still was riveting. It was just so moving. And it's about the death of his mother. It's taken him a long time to come to terms. She died about 6 years ago, and he's in a recent video on Bandcamp. I pay the Bandcamp subscription, £3 a month. You get a longer video than the one he releases with a completely different video. And there's a 16-minute video on Bandcamp if you pay the fee about that song. And he goes through all his early experiments with the chords at his house in London, and it goes on, and it gets more and more detailed. And he talks a lot about establishing the atmosphere of the song. I think it's interesting to hear, and this is an absolute illustration of how he works. This is the most personal and heartfelt song I think he's ever written about anything. He exposes himself more on this than any song he's ever written. And yet to hear the meticulous degree to which he's tried to achieve the emotional effects using instrumentation and technology. There's a great point in the video where he says, and we're nearly finished, and I was still thinking this isn't quite atmospheric enough. And I'd written the cello solo, and that took me a long time. He said, and Ian Burge plays that brilliantly, and he played it on the demo, and he played it on the session. And then Brian came down. This is again Brian Eno, and he said, and his first thought was, "I tell you what, Peter, what we should do on this is feed your vocal through a transformer program." And that's what they do. And I think I mentioned to you about you can hear this other voice under his. That's the same voice through the transformer program. I suspect Brian Eno wanted to take the lead voice out and just have the transformer program, but luckily Gabriel was there to preserve the song. And it just echoes very subconsciously, and it makes the vocal sound ghostly. And that is actually a brilliant producer's idea. And Brian Eno is not credited at all on that track, but he influenced the atmosphere. It's that middle section, I walk around the house in which we lived, and that's enhanced by that, and it's very subtle, and you wouldn't know it unless you listened to the album, the stereo mix on surround, as I unfortunately did, and then saw that video. So I think that's the problem. He could have done a good album of songs like And Still and So Much and Playing for Time much more quickly, but he gets completely enmeshed in the process, and I think for him the process is the point. He occasionally releases something, but he goes into the studio. The band say this album was simpler for them. In previous albums, they often jammed around the songs for ages. Although David Rhodes said he did all his parts for the third album in 3 weeks. There was all 3 weeks. That was it. On this album and the one before, actually, he says the songs are much more complete when they turn up. They turn up as a band, him Manu Katché and Tony Levin. They all booked at the same time, and they spent 10 days. He said on the first 10 days we did 18 tracks. So and they said they were all written and they'd all had lyrics, and that's a new thing. He says usually the lyrics are the last thing, but the lyrics were written before the band turned up this time, and they just play and do several versions.
I think it's fascinating hearing the background to this, which I wasn't aware of, and the way that artists work, like, you know, the way in which artists approach the material and work through lots of ideas, and eventually, you know, you get the finished product, and you know, what he starts off doing one thing, but it becomes, you know, whatever the IO was he was discussing 20 odd years ago, this is, as you say, a different version of that. But it's overall, I started off not really thinking anything about the album, but as I've listened to, you know, I've listened to it at least once a day over the last week or two, and on headphones, and it does grow on you, I think, and I think it's to what I love about Peter Gabriel is I love there's a kind of there's a sincerity of a real, you feel a real connection with him. I remember one time a song I'd never heard before called Father and Son. I was in Wembley Arena with Jacko Jakczyk, and we were both sitting there watching it, and we both were crying, just as Gabriel was sitting at the piano on his own singing this song Father and Son. And I haven't been quite moved to tears with this experience, because you wouldn't expect to in many respects, but he does have an emotional thing going on whenever I listen to Gabriel, at his best. And at his worst, in inverted commas, it's all right, you know. You know.
I think that's the weird thing about him. There's a direct emotional connection when you hear him sing. And when you hear him sing a song like And Still or Father Son Over, which is a very beautiful song, he said that was an easier song to write than And Still, because he had a much less complicated emotional relationship with his dad. His dad gave him the love of electronics and gadgetry, which obviously still lurks there. His mum loved music. His mum loved classical music. And because of her, there was always music playing in the house. And that really influenced him as well. And he also says his mum said she loved what he did, but then always indicated that she didn't really think he was a proper musician. He said, which is very... And he said she was a controlling influence, and much of my emotional life is trying to escape that control. So he's quite eloquent about it and quite, you know, self-aware. But so on songs like that, the passion is easy to see, and it's obvious what he's singing about. And some of these songs are about bizarre things. I mean, I'm going to turn to this now, which is the tour program. You know, if you want to see what the album cover actually looks like in full, there it is. That picture, he's got 3 hands on that picture, and I hope that was going to be on the cover. But you know, there's a section on just about every song in this, and Panopticon is, which you don't like, which I think is grown on me a lot. I'll just read a quick paragraph, because this is what I find bizarre about him. He can make you move. I have been working on, the first song is based on an idea I have been working on to initiate the creation of an infinitely expandable, accessible data globe. And so, you know, so there's a whole, that's the investigative commons as well, which is what The Court is based on. The Court is a song about the erratic nature of justice in the world. And how do these songs come to him? I mean, it's a man who's got wide-ranging interests and who is easily distracted. And if you listen to it as well, on Panopticon, he sings, and we've got Witness on the ground. Well, Witness is, of course, an organisation he set up, which years ago, sort of distributing mobile cameras to people after the Rodney King case, and they've caught thousands of human rights abuses on video, and they've been uploaded to the internet, and people have been charged and prosecuted because of that. And then in the last song, you've got the voice of the Elders coming through the mist, and the Elders is a bizarre supergroup of which over its lifetime has included Nelson Mandela, Kofi Annan, Desmond Tutu, Mary Robinson, Jimmy Carter,
some of whom are name checked in that song, aren't they?
Yeah, Tutu and Madiba. Madiba is, of course, the nickname for Mandela.
Yeah.
And both of those he knew. And that song, which I thought was a bit anodyne live, though it went down very well, I think works better on the record. I think that as a closing song, even though it can be a bit twee, like Love Can Heal, Live and Let Live, he actually believes it.
Yeah.
And on the video, he says, I don't want to, things like Gaza going on, I don't want to sound like some hippie walking around with a bunch of flowers, he says. And he says, that's how it could be taken. I don't think that's the answer to those things, but generally, it's a difficult thing to forgive someone. And if we could forgive each other and see each other as people, a lot of these problems could be solved, you know. And
I think that's a good point. And I think the Beatles, famously, all you need is love, at the time of where the Vietnam War was raging, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
These things, and this song that we're talking about, they sound hopelessly naive, and all the rest of it. But you know what? I think if more people were hopelessly naive in that way, the world might actually be a better place. And we might
and it's not very fashionable. It's not very contemporary and cynical. But I'm glad someone's saying it. Love Can Heal was inspired by the death of Joe Cox, who he knew. The Labour MP. And he met her at a series of events where they were discussing some project. So obviously he attends a lot of events where he's discussing some kind of project, and he was stunned and shocked by her death.
And I think, as we say, the world needs more of that rather than less. And it's nice to have an album which kind of has that sort of optimism to it. The one characteristic I always think of when I think of Peter Gabriel is optimism.
Yeah, and that's. I mean, unlike you, I do enjoy a lot of Up. But I understand your criticisms. I've got a friend who's a huge fan of Peter Gabriel and loved this tour that's just happened. He never got on with Up, and he thinks it's cold, and I think that there's some truth in that. There's some truth in its kind of icy and doom-laden demeanor Up. Whereas this, although it deals with mortality and death and lots of other issues, it seems an optimistic, upbeat record, particularly by the end. He's not trying to be doom-laden. He's trying to be realistic, bizarrely for him, and he's trying to be optimistic, as you say. I think this is a more optimistic record than Up by a long way. I think it's a better record, and I think the songs are better.